Italy, the center of the great Roman Empire, the year 79 AD. On a hot summer evening, people in the capital city of Rome witness a strange phenomenon. A gray substance, almost like dirty snow, falls from the sky over the city. But this is not a snowstorm. 120 miles to the south, a smoldering volcano, Mount Vesuvius, has erupted in a burst of molten rock and ash. It was a disaster of apocalyptic scale. The cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, which had lived in the mountain's shadow for generations, crumbled into ruin. The people of these cities were condemned to a cruel fate, almost too horrible to imagine. Blinded by red-hot ash and choked by poisonous gases, they died one by one. As the eruption continued, their bodies were slowly buried in the layers of boiling mud and pumice until no trace of life or civilization remained. Never before in recorded history had such a densely populated area been victim to such a catastrophe. As time passed, these once vibrant cities faded from the memory of later generations. All that remained were their names on ancient maps and some artwork and treasures attributed to the cities. And thus, one of the greatest mysteries of history was born. For over 16 centuries, scholars and art lovers searched to unravel the mysteries of these lost cities. What had happened? They knew the answer lay buried deep within the earth, but no one knew where. Until a peasant farmer in the early 18th century happened upon one of the greatest finds in the history of archaeology. A vast chasm had opened in the ground near his field, revealing the remains of an ancient structure. An expedition was organized to explore the underground ruins. Suddenly, a light from an explorer's torch fell on a plaque inscribed with Latin characters. From a single word, Herculanensis, archaeologists realized that they had stumbled across the theater in Herculaneum, one of the cities that had been wiped out by Vesuvius. An ancient riddle was solved at last. It was an incredible discovery. And today, almost 300 years later, objects like this glass jar are still being discovered when archaeologists brush away the hardened mud. But such findings pale next to other more dramatic discoveries, like these skeletons of some of the former inhabitants of Herculaneum who did not manage to get away in time. Before its fall, Herculaneum was a prosperous city, as seen in the beauty of its houses, many of which had a lavishly decorated atrium. Dozens of bronze statues have been found in many of the villas and are today preserved in the National Museum in Naples. These findings, lost for nearly 2,000 years, now form one of the world's greatest collections of bronze art. But the most important discovery took place inside the so-called Villa of the Papyri, which is still partially buried under layers of volcanic rock, an entire library with thousands of ancient scrolls. Carbonized but intact, these documents are still being unrolled by experts, so their contents can be deciphered. The finding of the papyri in the mid-1700s fueled the search for another lost city, Pompeii. It too was discovered by chance in 1756, a few years after Herculaneum. Even today, parts of Pompeii are still buried under volcanic rock, though most of its treasures have been brought to light. Despite the devastation by Vesuvius, a number of frescoes survived that helped put a face on this ancient civilization. This portrait of a wealthy merchant and his wife could represent any of the more than 10,000 inhabitants of the city. It was at this unimposing site between Via Stabiana and the now famous Via dell'Abbondanza that the remarkable painting was found. As archaeologists excavated the remains of this house, they found a portrait of the owner on the wall of a room. The fresco contained one small but noteworthy detail. The woman portrayed at her husband's side was holding a waxed tablet, which at the time was used for writing. Scholars deduced that the woman may have kept the books in the shop she ran with her husband. Not unlike some families today, the couple operated their business, a successful bakery and sales outlet, out of their own home. Despite all the advances of modern civilization, it is remarkable how little the basics of everyday life have changed in 2,000 years. Whereas today the shopping mall has become a major focal point of social and commercial activity, in Roman times it was the Forum. Traffic and congestion were an issue then, even as they are now, and so the center area was ingeniously designed to be a pedestrian-only zone. Citizens would come here to take part in the public and social life of the city, or simply to enjoy a stroll with family or friends. The raised steps of the arcade weren't just for appearance. They were also to prohibit chariots, so visitors wouldn't have to worry about being run over by horses. In Pompeii, as in every Roman city, the Forum was the center of religious, political, and commercial life. The city's administrative offices and archives were situated in this square. Nearby was the Comitium, a place where male citizens went to cast their ballots. Though women were an important part of Roman society, they did not have the right to vote. But they could, much like today, have a strong influence on the view of their husbands. On the right-hand side of the Forum stood a building owned by the wealthy noblewoman Umecchia, who was descended from an influential Pompeii family. Nearly 26,000 square feet in area, it was one of the largest buildings in the Forum, roughly half the size of a football field. Archaeologists believe it was probably an important market where people could buy clothing and material, especially wool. One surprising discovery was the unearthing of these structures set near the entrance to the building. It may sound incredible, but experts believe them to be urinals, where the urine of visitors was collected to be used in bleaching and softening the wool. In a prominent location at the center of the Forum stood the Temple of Jove, or Jupiter. Standing over 40 feet high, it was the largest religious building in the city, with 6 columns along the facade. Of the temple's many statues, all that has survived is this head of Jove, the original of which is kept in the National Museum in Naples. Though little of the building remains, enough is known about it that it is possible to visually recreate its original splendor. In its time, this was the most important monument in Pompeii. The entire area of the Forum looked like this, with twin-level colonnades and the Temple of Jupiter in the background. Here also was one of the biggest schools in Pompeii, with classes held under these porticos. It seems discipline was a lot stricter in those days. This fresco shows a pupil being flogged by his teacher while classmates look on. In this open classroom, no one dared to complain. Pupils sat on the ground and teachers held the lessons outdoors with little regard to weather conditions. And in addition to all that, there was always a crowd of people and street vendors going about their business. To the left of the Forum lay the Temple of Apollo. It was a very popular place of worship because Apollo was considered to be the guardian deity of Pompeii. In addition to paying him tribute, people came here to use the sundial atop this column. Apollo was the god who regulated harmony and equilibrium, and thus also the passage of time. Not surprisingly, his temple was revered above all others except that of Jupiter, Apollo's father. One of the places most often visited in Roman times was the thermal baths. Built in 80 BC, the baths had separate entrances for men and women and also separate sections for bathing. This room was known as the tepidarium, a place where guests were always in hot water, so to speak. Its pool was donated by an industrialist from Capua named Marcus Nigidius Vacula, who made very certain everyone knew the gift was from him. In this room, with its ceiling open to the sky, was the pool of the frigidarium. It was filled with cold water, into which bathers plunged after having a hot sauna. Pompeii was built in the form of an oval about 2 miles around. A great wall with 7 gates surrounded the city. At this intersection once stood the temple of Fortuna Augusta, dedicated to the emperor's lucky star. Beside it was a portico with houses where people lived, and in the background was the arch dedicated to the Emperor Caligula. Historians today are able to recreate the appearance of these buildings in great detail, a tribute to modern science and archaeology. Like all Roman cities, Pompeii had an amphitheater where gladiators fought. The amphitheater in Pompeii is one of the oldest in the entire Roman world. Here in this very stadium, in the year 59 AD, an event took place that was destined to provoke the intervention of the Emperor Nero himself. During one of the contests, bloody and violent fighting broke out among the spectators themselves. Many were killed. Enraged by the scandal, Emperor Nero ordered the amphitheater closed for a period of 10 years. The decree was eventually annulled, thanks to the intervention of the Empress Poppaea. The Pompeians were thrilled to see their games reinstated. The gladiators were heroes, even worshipped by children, who used to draw pictures of their favorite fighters on the walls of the city. The gladiators trained and lived in a large palestra that was housed in an arcaded courtyard. It was part of the single complex that also held the great theater and the Odeon, a smaller theater or concert hall. For couples who wanted to enjoy a night on the town, this precursor to today's multiplex was the place to go. Plays and concerts were both performed in the Odeon. In Roman times, the Odeon was covered, so theater-goers sitting on the steps could enjoy perfect acoustics. The great theater was built into a hill, as had been done in ancient Greece. There was no admission charge for these performances. Rather, they were sponsored like today's public theater. Only here it was usually politicians seeking re-election who paid the bill. The plays were always put on during the day.